I think we are moving as a culture towards something that looks rather autistic and like something with literal right hemisphere deficits. When I was lecturing in Canada at a particular occasion, a woman came up to the microphone afterwards to ask a question. She said, I teach 5 to 7-year-olds, and I and my colleagues have found that just in the last few years we have to teach children how to read the human face. Now, that is an absolutely classic thing that until that moment I had no idea that anyone other than an autistic child would have difficulty reading a human face. That's extraordinary.
That's
scary. And then if you put that together with other findings, such as that generationally people are, the cohort of between 19 and 30 have been tested over the years for the last 40 years, and there is a trend for them to be less empathic than they used to be. And when you get people taking things literally and having to have things that in the past you would never have had to explain to them, it looks like things are actually moving towards a more left hemisphere dominated condition, something approximating a kind of autism.
Hi. You just had a clip there of Dr. Iain Mcgilchrist talking about society and is our society becoming an autistic society. And he notes how he was interacting with one lady, special education lady, and she was noting how they're having to teach small kids how to read faces, which is something you normally see in an autistic society. And he's stating that this inability to empathize with others that we see so much in young people today, and also having to spell things out to them, is a kind of a form of autism. So the question is our society becoming autistic? Now, what we have to understand here is that if somebody who's a specialist in autism were to look at the video by Iain Mcgilchrist, they might turn around and say, no, technically speaking, autism is this, and this. But I think really what he's doing is speaking more in a broad way. And so he's talking about personality traits rather than clinical diagnosis. And perhaps maybe after a few years more of the way kids and young people are going these days, Generation Z or Z, maybe they'll come out with some diagnosis and says XYZ syndrome or whatever it is. But his observation in general seems to be correct. So don't take it too seriously and take it that it's everybody's autistic, or everybody's on the spectrum. I hear this a lot, people saying on the spectrum. And for me, it's a personal irritation that years ago we used to take somebody, for example, who's autistic and say autistic or non-autistic. Then they came with the spectrum thing. And the problem with the spectrum is that you might as well bung everybody in the spectrum. So let's move away from clinical diagnosis, which is a technicality, and just think in terms of everyday society and how we perceive society, and what Iain Mcgilchrist really talking about, an autistic society. What he means by an autistic society is a society that lacks empathy, a society that doesn't know how to read people, a society that has people having an inability to deal with change. Basically, autistics cannot deal with change. They find it very hard to learn things. They're very stuck in their ways. And it's a very complex health condition, and with complex etiology, and probably more than one etiology, to be honest with you. But the society, in the sense of autism in the society, is that it's becoming an emotionally shut down society. And that what's happening is people are less expressive, less empathetic, less capable of understanding other people. And no better way to see this than when we look at the culture wars that are taking place these days, whereby there's a huge polarization in many parts of society. It used to be like when I was a kid and a teenager, people could be left-wing, people could be right-wing, and they could discuss and agree to disagree. Where more and more today, we have people who are isolated, people who are, they are disconnected and are just in their own little bubble. and they can only relate to people who have the same views and attitudes as them. Another example of this we can see, for example, in Hollywood movies. There's been a general degradation of Hollywood movies and many, many TV shows because of an agenda, a woke agenda of trying to force all this diversity and progressivism into the story, where, you know, a story should be a good narrative first. It shouldn't have quotas on how many people of a certain background or ethnicity, or, you know, maybe you have to have a certain percentage disabled, a certain percentage of a certain color, ethnicity, etc., or sexual orientation, or whatever it is, or gender. So they're forcing an agenda, and they're putting an agenda ahead of the storyline. And the result, of course, is weak TV and weak movies. And they're not so bothered with the character development of the characters. And so people find it hard to relate with these unrealistic characters. So this is just an example. And we've another example, especially I think a great example, we look at America, for instance, how people are, you know, on the left and the right are just relating to each other as if they are completely opposites, that they have nothing in common. And the problem is, if you think of it, he's saying autistic society. I would say schizoid society from the point of view of psychoanalysis. So there is a school of psychoanalysis which Melanie Klein, she's a child psychologist and child psychotherapist, and she created a school called the Object Relation School of Psychoanalysis. And it really talks about how the young child relates to the world around them. And in her theory, and it's a theory, but when I talk about psychoanalytic theories, don't take them too seriously, in the sense that don't take them literally. These psychoanalysts were trying to come up with theories that could explain things. When you don't have factual evidence, you only have observation, which basically puts you in the realm of philosophy. Anyway, here's her basic theory very quickly. Her theory is that the first 18 months, the young baby does not see a disconnect between themselves and their mother. And slowly but surely, the baby starts to see the mother as something external. And it is internal, mother is external. And it is basically what's called a paranoid schizoid phase for this first 18 months, whereby the child can be quite aggressive, and the little baby, it doesn't have an understanding of outer and inner. It's just something is me, or something, initially something, everything is me, the mom is me, and then after a while it starts having an aggression towards aspects of mom, which he puts down as good breast and bad breast. She's talking about breastfeeding. It's back in the 1930s. But basically she expresses, or he expresses, their aggression towards their mom to some degree. Anything outside they tend to have an aggression towards. They don't have any empathy. Things are black and white. Roughly speaking, around the 18-month mark, the child starts to be aware that the mother is not the child, and that the mother is possibly getting hurt when the child is aggressive. She gives an example of the child biting the nipple, but in so many ways that child, like the little baby, might bite you or whatever. So the child will demonstrate aggression. So little babies are not always sweet all the time. They do have aggression, although in general they come across sweet to us because they can't do much. You can't jump around and kick you in the head or anything. They can pee on you, of course, and spit on you and vomit on you and all that stuff. But in their own way, they can be aggressive. And if you understand psychoanalytic theory, it basically says that a young child in the first years of life doesn't repress things. And that means aggression comes out straight away, affection comes out straight away. So as the child starts feeling bad about maybe I'm hurting the mother, it starts developing empathy towards the other. And now it moves from the paranoid schizoid phase, it moves into what's called the depressive phase. And the depressive phase is whereby you now start having, let's say, regret, empathy, feelings towards another. And it gives you a depth of personality. Jacques Lacan, the French psychoanalyst who came after Melanie Klein, he would outline the Mobius strip. And the Mobius strip has neither a beginning nor an end. So the idea of the Mobius strip is that when you start having this empathy towards the other, there's no discrete barrier between outer and inner. Whereas the small kid initially has no sense of other, and then the sense of other it has, either has no sense of other, or the sense of other it has is like the enemy, the outsider, me, not me. And as it starts developing a conscience, a feeling bad about hurting the mom and so on, that gives a development of the personality, and that gives a depth of character, a depth of personality, and then we get the Mobius strip where the outer and the inner are intermixed. So if we look at somebody who's schizophrenic personality, in full-blown schizophrenia, because many schizophrenics are, sometimes they're here and sometimes they're not, and they tend to be somewhat paranoid all the time, but they always have some kind of fantasies. But when they go full-blown, and they're not full-blown all the time, depends upon when you take drugs, don't take drugs, how severely, or let's say a severe, very symptomatic schizophrenic, they will see things very literally, and they will see everything as outside versus inside. And so, say for example, there was a movie of some years ago called The Hills of Eyes. It's about like serial killers and stuff. If you say that to a schizophrenic person who's in a full-blown schizophrenic state, they might say, where are the eyes? Now we would obviously have something like The Hills of Eyes, meaning there's people in the hills looking out at us. Wherever I go, people are looking. But they might take it literally, the hills literally have eyes. And so there's a lack of metaphorical thinking when they're very symptomatic. So what's actually happening with schizophrenia is the person is having an inability to integrate this outer and inner, and the personality starts crumbling, cracking, and falling apart. And according to Carl Gustav Jung, he believes that the symptoms of schizophrenia are an attempt at recovery. So we're trying to, if you think of it this way, the amount of energy it takes to maintain consciousness, like you're watching this video now, you have a conscious attention. The amount of energy that takes is substantial. You look at your brain, a huge amount of glucose goes in your brain. I think 60 or 70% of all the glucose, the sugar that's in your body, that's going in, that's being burnt. You know, if you burn 200 grams of glucose in a day, 150 or something like that goes to your brain. Brain is hungry for energy. Brain has a massive overhead. I remember some years ago in a medical museum and looking at the brain and looking at the eyeballs and stuff, and you can see how the huge cortexes from the eyes, basically half your brain, your head is eyeballs. You need eyeballs, these huge two big optic nerves, and then the back of the brain, which is the optic center. Brain is a high overhead organ, and to maintain consciousness requires a lot of overhead. Not just energetically in the body, but psychologically, levels of integration of the personality, understanding what is fantasy, what is not. Just think, for example, you're walking down the street and you're having a fantasy, and then I better go, I better look now, the bus is coming, I should cross the road and not get hit by the bus. That's a huge overhead to walk down the street using basically the brainstem, reptilian side of your part of your brain is doing the walking. Meanwhile, the limbic system is working as you fantasize and memorize maybe some nice experience. And then suddenly the higher part of your brain kick in, and that wakes you to reality of what you have to do. So your brain is switching between levels all the time. You know, we do all sorts of technical things while holding conversations and having inner dialogues and so on. So it's a very high overhead organ. And if the integration is not there psychologically, bits of it will start collapsing. And what bits collapsing in your conscious mind means is you are either unable to maintain consciousness. We see that with very sick people, for example. They get so sick they just go unconscious because they just can't maintain consciousness. Or a very low level of consciousness, they're kind of out of it. That's like physical ill health. But psychologically as well, there's a big overhead in you being aware, and it requires a lot of integration. So when that integration starts going down in a severe way, you start getting mental health. Often paranoia is one of the first things people see, whereby paranoia tends to be something that, in a way, one of the speculations of paranoia is that the person has low self-esteem, and the paranoia builds them up and makes them feel that they're important because they have a whole mystery thing going on where people are watching them and trying to organize their life. It gives a sense of self-importance. So although they're being tormented with their paranoia, and that's also the superego, the inner critic is tormenting them, but also gives a sense of importance. You're the hero of the story in a way. Whereas a lot of people feel they're nothing. That's their problem. And then the paranoia can develop further into schizoid states, whereby at a deep level, you're living completely in a fantasy world. As Sigmund Freud says, a madman is a man who's sleeping while he's awake. He can't differentiate sleep from waking, dreams from reality. And you just look at when we're having dreams, you have all sorts of wild dreams. But if you're having these wild dreams while still being awake, you'd be basically schizophrenic. So, but society can also go like that. So if we take, for example, medieval society, they're burning witches and getting a sadistic pleasure from burning witches because they were extremely emotionally repressed. Sexuality was something you're not supposed to deal with. You're supposed to just pray and remember God and want to go to heaven and stuff like that. And so they became a schizoid kind of society, whereby they would find a scapegoat in the form of witch, do a bit of torturing, which would probably be a lot of fun to these people. They could get their aggression out and then eventually burn her, and that would more aggression out, and probably all feel relaxed and satisfied at the end of it. That's the problem with a schizoid society. We see that with some societies which have gone very backward. They tend to be aggressive and non-sympathetic, and everything's black and white. And the same thing in a different way we see in the modern world. Not that we're burning witches or being, super restrictive, but in a sense that there's a certain discourse or dialogue in society, and if you don't agree with this mainstream view, you're a baddie and you have to be punished. And the punishment can be an extreme punishment, okay? So that's an example of a schizoid society. So what we see in America now, for example, is it's very much a schizoid kind of society. In the last week, we saw Donald Trump being convicted. A lot of people reckon that it's all on technicalities, but basically he's like this figure that must be hated upon. And that's very much a schizoid behavioral tendency, autocratic thinking, and a tendency to, destroy the other as the baddie. And we must destroy the other. And of course, this is exactly what Adolf Hitler and the Nazis were doing to the Jews. We just have to eliminate the Jews. This black and white thinking. Black and white thinking is always schizoid thinking. So we have to move away from it. So is our society becoming more autistic? Yes, in the sense of psychologically, psychoanalytically, it's a schizoid society whereby there's more division and polarization, and people are thinking in a black and white way and not having empathy towards the other, because there's a disintegration in society. And yes, he is right in that sense. And what can we do about it? Well, first of all, obviously a big part to play is our inability to deal with change, in the sense that we have a lot of technology that's come in, and we've all handed that technology off to our kids, and that technology has also corralled us to a great degree. And an issue we have is that we can't adapt quick enough to the technology. And so, when I was a kid, kids were playing on the street. Now there's nobody on the street. Kids are all on their devices. And this makes the kids more introverted, having less social skills, more aversion for reality checking in real life. And it's just getting worse because, my son, for example, he got a smartphone access to a smartphone at age 12. Nowadays they're handing them out to babies. I do believe this will go full circle. After another few years, people realize the damage it's doing. As what's happening now is the kids, the young people, what I would notice is that they're not very empathetic, they're in their own bubble, they're not aware, they're somewhat self-righteous, and they're very clever and broad-minded in some ways, but you have to instruct them on very basic things. They're not picking up on civilization as such, and they have terrible people skills. Interpersonal skills are not good. It's a self-absorbed society. And I'd be inclined to think to be worse with the kids now coming in who are getting smartphones at 2 months old or 6 months old or whatever it is. Mommy, daddy work, mommy, daddy put on these cocoa melon or some nonsense like that, and the kid is like watching this thing. You might think it's harmless. I'm busy. Yeah, you're busy. Who's raising your kid? So we can't adapt quick enough to technology. And technology is driving us so much. So I define many, like I can't do this video without technology. It's very useful. But years ago, I felt I used to have more time. These days I'm very busy because there's so much stuff we have to do. So technology is dehumanizing us, sadly. And we kind of have two choices. One choice is to dump the technology, and the other choice is to balance it better. So we'll see what happens. I'm inclined to think that the schizoid society, the autistic society is going to increase, and over the next few years, people are going to get more and more upset about how it's very imbalanced. People already know, these devices and technology can ruin your life. There's probably going to be more of a movement away from devices or a better way of handling them. Parents will start realizing that I shouldn't be giving a 6-month-old baby a smartphone. If you're a parent of a 6-month-old baby, take off the smartphone, give them a little plaything that will develop their hand-eye coordination, all these old things that we had for babies and all that stuff was developed by child psychologists and so on, it's actually developed their motor skills, etc. I'm not saying don't give your kids access to technology. You can't get away from it. We're living in this society. But we have to reduce because it depersonalizes people and it makes your kid more of an autistic kid. Not that they're going to have autistic, they're going to be autistic as an autism, but they're simply going to be a less empathic, more judgmental, more closed off, a more limited version of who they could be. In case you're not aware of iain Mcgilchrist and what his focus is very much that we go from left brain to right brain. And I know some of you probably say, oh, that's all debunked, left brain, right brain. Aspects of the argument's always more nuanced. But let's say, rather than think of left brain, right brain, just think there's a part of your brain which is very analytical and judgmental, and it's very good at filing tax returns, but it ain't creative. And it's very good at making rules and regulations. That's dominating in society, has been since the Industrial Revolution. A very simple example I would give is you have a road in a city and there's no ramps. And then a year later they put in ramps. And a year later they put in more ramps. And a year later they put in more ramps. Then the locals start complaining, I'm just bouncing all over the place, wrecking the suspension of my bike, my car, I'm falling off the damn thing. What's the purpose of having more ramps? But if you talk to the people in the city council, they say that we have to prove that we're doing something, so we need to put more ramps. And they also tap themselves in the back because we put more ramps than last year. That's the problem. I was watching a video, I like watching some of these old videos recently, and it was where they're interviewing people from years ago. So this particular video, some of these videos are fascinating, interviewing people from 1930s, about being raised in the 1880s, that sort of stuff. This one was a video of a guy who was in the he's about 60 or 58 or something in the mid-1990s, and talked about being raised, being a young guy in his 20s and 1950s. And he was saying that life was easier and your car would have bald tires, nobody bothered. And even if I go back to my youth, I would remember that there was far less rules and regulations. So every year there's more rules, more regulations, and they'll say it's for your safety. And okay, things like a seatbelt is a very useful thing for safety. A crash helmet for your head, very useful. I've fallen off bikes with the crash helmets, and I would have been in a mess without them. But should the state be in any state? Should we be dominating the people and making the people live a very restricted life for their benefit, apparently? Should we be dominating the people with so-called improvements that actually take away from the quality of living? So this is the problem of this left brain thinking. Whether it's exactly left brain, as Dr. iain Mcgilchrist says, or just different parts of the brain, but definitely restrictive thinking that has us leading what I'd call a schizoid society, what he would call an autistic society. And as it's going, if you think of it logically, look how many rules and regulations there is today, and how many regulations there was 20 years ago, and how many regulations there was 40 years ago. Some of it's useful, but a lot of it's just more restrictive. And if you keep going down this road, 50 years from now, you'll have a society that's extremely, extremely restrictive. And, you'll be getting, fined and dragged into courts for, all sorts of silly things. Kissing in the street or something like that. Scratching your bottom on the street. Silly things. And it could be a very punitive society. So I do agree that we have to move away. It's good. We've got organization and all that stuff, but we have to go back to something that's more the right brain idea of creative and expressive, and that's also very, very important. So are we heading into an autistic society? Is society becoming more autistic, more schizoid? Yes, it is. Does it have to continue? No, it doesn't. But it'll only stop if we start backing up and saying, do I want to live like a machine, or do I want to live like a human being? We must choose to live like a human being. That doesn't mean we have to go and dump the technology and live in a village somewhere, like the 18th century. But we have to get off this merry-go-round of, more and more efficiency, squeezing people into a very small space, and a society that's more punitive and restrictive, and people who are less creative and more dull-witted. And do you want a society where everybody's like a little mini bureaucrat? I don't think so. So I think it's a good point he's making. I like his videos, recommend you check out his channel, his videos. I'm not saying he's 100% right, but he's onto something. And we need to create a discourse around this and realize that, what do we really want in our society? And what's really good in our society? And how do we help the people in our society be happy, well-integrated, nice people who are good for society, rather than just a bunch of regulations or on-the-paper achievements? It's like the GDP thing. You can chase GDP and have great GDP, but people can be poor. Quality living is important. And quality of living is on every level of being. Okay, hope you liked the video. If you do, please like, subscribe, and I'll talk to you next time.